Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Mon nom est Stéphane Pallage. Catherine m'a présenté comme le recteur de l'UQAM. J'en suis très fier. Je suis aussi économiste et le fier diplômé d'une grande université américaine, l'Université Carnegie Mellon. C'est un privilège de faire l'introduction du prochain panel. Une discussion entre trois grands esprits, John Willding, avocat chez Stinson à Dallas, dont le curriculum vitae est rempli de rencontres avec le président Trump. Brian Tobin, ancien premier ministre de Terre-Neuve, actuellement vice-président de BMO Groupe financier, et Bernard Spitz, auteur, stratège et président de BSC. Le panel a un titre magnifique, « Une nouvelle ère de coopération économique entre les États-Unis, l'Union européenne et le Canada. » Notre animateur sera nul autre que David Brulotte, délégué général du Québec à New York. Mais avant de leur donner la parole, j'aimerais partager avec vous quelques réflexions de recteurs et peut-être d'économistes. Les économistes aiment les échanges. Il n'existe pas de situation en économie sans gain à l'échange. Si deux parties s'entendent sur un deal, elles sont toutes deux dans une meilleure situation avec le deal que sans lui. C'est de la science économique élémentaire. Il ne peut exister de perdant à l'échange. Un deal n'a lieu que s'il est gagnant-gagnant. Les accords de libre-échange maximisent les gains du commerce en éliminant les barrières commerciales. Les tarifs douaniers sont la barrière la plus courante. Les économistes vous diront qu'ils doivent être éliminés en premier si l'on veut optimiser les gains à l'échange. Introduire de nouveaux tarifs douaniers au XXIe siècle est un concept surprenant qui aurait intérêt à réduire l'échange entre les nations. La motivation souvent évoquée pour ces tarifs serait le désir de négocier un meilleur deal. Or, si l'entente originale a vu le jour, aucune partie n'était perdante. Chercher une meilleure entente fait l'hypothèse que les pays n'ont pas d'autres partenaires fiables vers lesquels se tourner pour réorienter leurs échanges commerciaux. Je suis très intéressé d'entendre nos panélistes sur les bénéfices à long terme de cette stratégie de nouveaux tarifs pour les États-Unis. Mais avant cela, en tant que recteur d'université, je me dois de soulever mes inquiétudes concernant les multiples pressions qu'ont subies les universités américaines au cours des derniers mois. Pression sur leur autonomie et pression sur la liberté académique. Les universités ont les seules expertises indépendantes pour établir ce qui est un fait et ce qui ne l'est pas. La liberté académique et l'autonomie universitaires protègent nos professeurs quand ils participent au débat public et donnent un avis expert. La liberté académique leur permet même de contredire un gouvernement. À l'heure de la désinformation, les universités ont un rôle fondamental pour informer le public. Nous représentons peut-être quelque chose comme le sixième pouvoir, un rempart contre l'ignorance et le dogme, un pilier de la démocratie. Après le législatif, le judiciaire, la presse et les médias sociaux, les universités sont le dernier contre-pouvoir, celui de la science, celui du savoir. Affaiblir l'autonomie universitaire élimine de facto la liberté académique puisque les professeurs perdront leur protection s'ils émettent un avis expert contraire à un décret ou à une politique. Je conclurai en reliant ceci à la performance économique. Daron Acemoglu et James Robinson, tous deux lauréats du prix Nobel d'économie en 2024, ont établi un lien très clair entre la qualité des institutions, notamment les institutions démocratiques, et la croissance économique. Affaiblir ces institutions risque de nuire à la performance économique du pays. Ceci, combiné à des tarifs, n'est-ce pas un étrange cocktail pour un futur radieux? Je lance la question à nos panélistes, mesdames et messieurs, John Willding, Brian Tobin, Bernard Spitz et David Brulotte.
Bonjour à vous tous, bonjour à vous toutes. J'espère que le lunch est agréable et pour ceux qui étaient ici ce midi, j'espère que vous avez eu l'entrée et le plat à temps. Mon nom est David Brulotte, je suis le délégué général du Québec à New York. C'est un honneur, un plaisir d'être ici avec vous ce midi pour un panel qui s'annonce être fort intéressant pour une conversation évidemment qui est dans l'air du temps, qui est revenue tout au long de la conférence d'hier, de dimanche d'hier et d'aujourd'hui. J'ai le plaisir d'être à la tête de la délégation générale du Québec à New York, première représentation du Québec ouverte dans le monde en 1940. On fait donc nos 85 ans cette année. Vous l'avez entendu de la ministre Biron ce matin, de plusieurs intervenants. Le Québec a l'honneur, la chance, l'opportunité d'avoir un réseau de 34 représentations dans 19 pays. C'est vraiment un héritage très, très important. John, good to have you with us. Brian, Bernard, bienvenue. I was mentioning that my name is David. I'm the head representative for Quebec in New York. First office open on the world scene for Quebec, opened in 1940, so 85 years that we're celebrating this year. But we've been active in New York since 1879 as the first foreign bond issuer on Wall Street. So we have a long-standing relationship not only with New York, with the financial markets, but obviously with the U.S. Now, that relationship has evolved, I think would be a diplomatic way to put this, and today's conversation is right in the middle of that evolution. Now, notre panel ce midi pourra se pencher sur plusieurs questions. Vous allez voir nos panélistes, on a eu l'occasion de discuter ensemble à plusieurs reprises dans les derniers jours, ont des opinions tranchées, pour le moindre, face à la montée des tensions commerciales entre le Canada, le Québec évidemment, les États-Unis, l'Union européenne. Quelles sont les nouvelles stratégies commerciales de ces entités? Est-ce que nos valeurs communes, est-ce que nos interdépendances économiques vont faire que l'on va passer à travers ces tensions qui sont importantes présentement? So to address these important questions, let me first introduce our esteemed panelists, and I invite you to go on the Conference of Montreal's website to have the full bios of all three of our panelists. But let me briefly go through some of their backgrounds and a little bit of why they're here with us today. So, Honorable Brian Tobin, thank you for joining once again. Brian, as many of you know, was Federal Minister of Industry early 2000, between 2000 and 2002, prior to which he served as the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador for 4 years. Before this, it was 15 years as a federal MP, including as Minister of Fisheries and Oceans in the federal cabinet between 93 and 96. Mr. Tobin was named Officer of the Order of Canada in 2013 for his contribution, obviously, to federal politics and provincial politics. Now, today, amongst, I assume, many other things, Mr. Tobin is Vice Chair of BMO Financial Group. Thank you. Thanks for joining us, Brian. Now, to his right, from your perspective, is Bernard Spitz, which will represent the EU perspective and French perspective. Mr. Spitz is president of BSC and has long been a participant to this conference, as well as an advisor to different CEOs in France and Europe and in the US. He was head of strategy at Vivendi Universal before founding BSC in 2004. He's also been at the head of the chairman of the French insurers and the president of the International Commission of the MEDEF, Mouvement des entreprises de France, et le président Macron le fait commandeur de la Légion d'honneur récemment. Bienvenue avec nous. Merci Bernard d'accepter l'invitation. And last but not least is John Willding, to my left, partner at Stinson LLP. Mr. Willding is a corporate lawyer hailing from Texas and DC with over 20 years of experience, frequently serves as lead counsel in M&A transactions, assists clients in setting up operations in the U.S., in PE funds, hedge funds, VC funds, been representing clients across the spectrum from institutional to seed investors. But perhaps most interestingly for today's conference, for 9 years, Mr. Willding, John has been a legal advisor to the Trump family in various capacity, and obviously will represent the U.S. perspective on our conversation. Now let's get that conversation started. And Brian, if I may, I'd like to start with you. We've talked about the U.S., Canada, Quebec, EU relationship over the last 24 hours here at this very conference. How would you characterize, in your words, the current relationship with the tariffs escalation that were just referred to? And do you see this as being a temporary blimp, as we hear sometimes in the U.S., or a very much profound structural shift?
Well, I'm sitting here thinking that I'm sitting next to my old best friend, but I'm leaning over a little closer to my new best friend. It's a challenging relationship today. John and Bernard and I have all had a chance to have a few little chats over the last day or so. There's no question that it's difficult for Canadians to navigate through some of the challenges of the last period of time. But I have to say that I am, notwithstanding the noise, incredibly confident that at the end of the day, we'll still be hanging out with our old best friend, but deepening the relationship with the EU and perhaps in some other places around the world. The reality is, I think it was said by a number of folks who've spoken at this conference over the last 24 hours, you can't change borders. We don't want to change borders. We live next to each other, we trade with each other, and we benefit from that relationship, and that won't change at the end of the day as we get to whatever the new normal is. There's, in my mind, not much doubt that the new normal will involve some form of tariff at some level. I think the levels that we see today, 50% for steel and aluminum, are not sustainable. As I like to remind John in our quiet, private conversation, the fact of the matter is the United States needs Canada's, Quebec's aluminum. There is no replacement for it. So if you can't buy it, and you can't ship it, and you can't use it at a price for which we can produce it plus a tariff, the harm ultimately will be to the U.S. Economy. Likewise, copper. I heard the president say, we don't need your copper. Well, I can tell you, there's not anything you can do in the way of increasing manufacturing or a manufacturing base that doesn't start with the foundational requirement for copper. So look, we've got a calm, measured, relatively dispassionate new prime minister who deals in facts, assesses the situation carefully. I think he's a great counterpoint to the great passion of a president like Donald Trump. I think in some ways it may explain why they have reset at least the relationship between the two leaders. It seems to be constructive. There is some suggestion of a quick deal being done between now and the G7. That would be miraculous if it happened, but it would be welcomed if it happened. Maybe John is negotiating it when he's not here on the stage with us as an M&A guy. With respect to the EU, I think there's a tremendous opportunity for Canada to do more business with the EU. We've got to remember that the trade agreement we have, the comprehensive trade agreement, takes the tariff off 98% of all the products that Canada does business with the EU. Now, that relationship from an economic point of view is relatively small, important, but small compared to that of our relationship with the United States. But it can be larger. A couple of quick comments, and then I'll cease. Just announced another $9 billion for defense. That moves us to the 2% target. We've got to get beyond that. Auditor General just 2 hours ago announced that a review of the jet fighter contract that we have with the United States supplier, in fact, is not $19 billion. It's gone up to $27 billion. And of course, Canada has announced that it's reviewing that contract and talking to European suppliers in the meantime. So look, there's a lot of things in flux. We have some cards: procurement, aluminum, copper, energy, and so on, I think those cards played wisely will result in a reset and a new normal, and we'll get back to doing business as we should, with some stability.
Thank you, Brian. And I think you're absolutely right on aluminum. As many of you know, 9 of the 10 smelters in Canada, aluminum smelters, are based in Quebec, and for us, we really see this as an energy
and the power for those is coming from Newfoundland and Labrador, so we're happy to help out with that aluminum.
Great, thank you. Now, John, I'm going to turn over to you, and I'll add just one bit of information. You recently gave, or you were on a podcast with Chris Bentley in the U.S., talking about your personal relationship with the Trump family, with President Trump as well. Unless someone raises their hand, you're probably the only one in the room who's had this conversation and these relationships with him. So on top of the initial question on the current relationship, the impact, can you tell us a bit more about your relationship with the family, how President Trump operates, and what's the end goal in all of this?
Happy to do that, but I thought we were BFFs, best friends forever. Now I'm the old friend. A couple of quick remarks. My wife and I had the pleasure of spending 3 days in Montreal. We had, beautiful experiences, meals, the culture, the weather, everything was really wonderful. So I want to thank everyone. I said to my wife, it appears that, everyone's so nice and they're saying great things about us, but they're all speaking in French and I don't speak French. So I don't really know what y'all think of me. I am a Texan from y'all. A true story, I was going to prepare for this morning, and I got a call that the foreign minister wanted to meet with me off-site right before. So I spoke with Don Trump Jr. this morning. I said, I'm in Montreal. I'm going to talk about aluminum tariffs, and the foreign minister wants to meet with me. And then they want me to meet with the priest. And I said, well, I'm a Methodist. And they said, well, just in case, I'm going to be with 1,000 Canadians. I've been working with the Trump family for 9 years, lots of ups and lots of downs. We've had all kinds of things thrown at us. We've had a lot of success. We've brought stability to the Western Hemisphere. I think some people take America's role in the world for granted. I think that style points matter. I've heard so much about aluminum the last 48 hours, and I get it. I had the pleasure of having dinner with Minister Skeet in Washington, D.C. I thought I was going to be meeting with someone that's from, Los Angeles or San Francisco, California politically, but we had such a wonderful meeting. We had so much in common, shared goals. In the United States, we tremendously value Canada. America first is not exclusionary. It's simply an acknowledgement that our house is in disarray. We have $38 trillion of debt. That's 120% of our GDP. We have the responsibility of protecting the entire world. No one else has that. If you wonder how long it takes a hypersonic Chinese nuclear weapon to hit Montreal, it's 7 minutes. So, we really need to look at things holistically. The relationship is a reset, and I think that people in D.C. have been wonderfully pleased with Prime Minister Carney, not so much with Trudeau, not so many nice things said about Donald Trump over the last 8 years, and so it's a reset.
It's good to hear, and
Yes.
good to hear that you and your wife had a good time in Montreal. In our prep call last week, John did say he took extra health insurance just in case something would happen, that he could fly back home. So I'm glad everything went well. Thank you for this.
We love Montreal.
Great, thank you. Bernard, I'm gonna turn over to you. We talked about the free trade agreement. As many of you know, Canada is the only G7 nation that has free trade agreements with all other G7 members. Obviously, we have a free trade agreement that's in place provisionally with Europe, CETA, that was signed in the fall of 2017. Now, with this free trade agreement, with what's happening here in North America, how do you see the EU and Canada, and obviously Quebec, doing more together, either through CETA, through other mechanisms perhaps, or through other industrial endeavors that we may take on together?
D'abord, un petit mot en français, juste
Bien sûr.
pour remercier la famille Rémillard, les organisateurs, et toute l'équipe du Forum qui a fait encore un travail formidable cette année, la 31e édition. Donc, je suis toujours privilégié et fier d'être parmi vous. I agree with everything you said except one thing. We are not former new best friend. We have always been best friend. I mean, and especially I would say for myself, my son lives here, my wife is born here. So I mean, if we are not best friends, I don't know what means best friends.
I stand corrected.
And I don't say that under...
We've been friends too, you know, we had a couple of world wars that we jumped over.
I like this. I thought this would go really wrong at some point, but I like this friendship. This is great.
And seen from France, to be honest, and seen from Europe, I think that the United States have never stopped to be the best friend. This country has freed our continent, and this is something we cannot forget anytime. And this is why, when something bad in terms of relationship happen, we are shocked. France and Europe, but France especially, has always been, even under the time of General de Gaulle, who was so proud of his sovereignty and independence, but every time there was something tough, big crisis, remember Cuba, etc., etc., France was always supporting the US. There was no question. We can be we can think differently, but when we have to make a choice about the essential, there is no doubt that we are friends. So, well, I think that what happened surprised us, and at the same time, if you think with a little bit of calm, it's some kind of a copycat of what happened 7 years ago. The only difference is that it was quicker, President Trump was more prepared, and things were stronger. But in 2018, we must not forget that we already had a first cycle of discussion about trade tariffs, already on steel and aluminium. And if you see the process that happened, it's more or less, we are in the middle of it. It started with from the United States. Then there was some kind of answer from, I speak for Europe, in terms of retaliation on some products, like symbolic ones. I remember Harley-Davidson, Levi's jeans, Bourbon. By the way, the Bourbon was a stupid idea because it was it's triggering retaliation against wine. And if you see the 27 countries in Europe, they are not all in trouble because of a problem on wine. You know, you have two especially, and so you know from where the idea comes from. Anyway, then we had a process of a negotiation, some kind of deadline, and at the end, in 2018, solution came at the end of July. So we are in the agenda, and I want to think like Brian that we are going to find a solution and a deal, because at the end of the day, when we look at the rationality of what's happening, I think that the strategy of President Trump was with three goals. One was financial, to provide some money to finance his tax cuts on revenue. The second was industrial, to support the production on the land of the US. And the third was about the trade deficit. Okay. But these are the goals. On the other hand, and this is something we could discuss with our economists, there are consequences. There are consequences on growth. There are consequences on inflation. There are a lot of consequences. So at the end, where is the balance? What is the best way to find a solution that will be win-win, if I can say so, in the new era that we are living? I think that there is a capacity for us to find that way. And about CETA, just to finish, because you mentioned it, this is a very strange thing. CETA is a treaty that is applied but not signed. It's unique. And it's not signed because of the weakness of not only the French government, but the European governments. You know, in Europe, you have 27 countries. 10 of them have not signed it. One has refused, has denounced it. It's not the biggest one. It's Cyprus. Some bad spirits said we have not spent enough money to have this vote. But the point is that even in France, we have in Italy, in other countries, the problem is the relationship with peasants. I remember last year when we had a debate on CETA, I talked to the Conservative Party and I said, well, if you don't want to sign an agreement, a free trade agreement with Canada, what kind of free trade agreement could you sign? And they were not capable to answer. They knew, in fact, it's just that the political internal issues about peasants, and that's it. But the good thing is that nevertheless, it is applied, and it's, I think that in the future that will go on. We have the same problem with Mercosur, by the way, which is not applied, this.
Right, thank you for the remarks. And for Canada, I think it's also a challenge to get CETA better known. It's not an agreement that the companies, the businesses know well, and that has mostly benefited the EU so far. So we're trying to really do more on that front as well. Brian, I'm going to come back to you in terms of your current role at BMO. Now, BMO has a very strong presence in the U.S. You acquired Bank of the West, headquartered in San Francisco, a couple of years back. And on this stage yesterday, our friend Goldie Hyder was asking Laurent Ferreira, CEO of the National Bank of Canada, what kind of advice he was giving to his clients who wanted to continue to do business in the U.S. And his answer, and I will quote, Laurent said, "We need to get along with the U.S. They are our biggest trading partner and will continue to be." Now, what type of advice do you give to your clients at BMO and all of the business leaders here in this room? And I'll add just a small caveat to this. Minister Skeet, I'm sure many of you heard him speak yesterday, and on Sunday he said, while companies are perhaps not investing as much in capex expenditures, they should buy the dip, quote unquote. Meaning they should invest in R&D and innovation. It's the right time to do this, whereas usually you're busy with a million other things. So what advice would you give to your clients at BMO, and do you think buying the dip in that sense makes sense right now?
Well, I think we tell our clients that the advantages of speaking of the Canada-U.S. relationship are so profound and so strong. The case is absolutely so compelling that at the end of the day, we'll figure this out. And, Bernard just reminded us what happened last time out, what the cycle was, what we went through, and finally a resolution. And I think it'll be the same this time. I'm not saying that we'll come to the same resolution, but I think we'll come to a resolution that we can all live with. And of course, the advice to clients is that there are certain investments you can make, certainly in technology. We are seeing a sea change with respect to the use of machine learning, AI, et cetera. These are all good investments to make. And of course, great capability here in Canada, capability in the US and Europe as well in that regard. But let's not kid ourselves. I've had the privilege of sitting on, I guess, about 8 public company boards, some US boards, Canadian boards, over the last 20 years. And there's no doubt that whether you're sitting in Europe or you're sitting in Canada, you're sitting in the United States today as well, that there is a pause. And notwithstanding the advice of a banker or an M&A lawyer or eminent public policy man from Europe, boards will take the prudent act of saying we're going to stand pat for a period of time until we understand well how this situation is going to land. The World Bank just today, literally an hour or two before we came down for lunch, issued a report and cut growth for 70% of the world, cut global growth as well in its forecast in a material way. So look, the reality is we need to get to resolution. The United States will always be Canada's best friend. I would say Canada will always be the biggest client of the United States. The world, because we sit next to each other, we forget a simple reality. the single biggest purchaser of American products, goods, and services, period, in the world is Canada. That isn't going to change. And of course, the single biggest purchaser of Canadians' goods and services is the United States. That said, we've been overly reliant upon the relationship. We've taken it too much for granted, and we've got to diversify. And I just would say one other thing I wanted to say to John. I think Canadians understand that President Trump, as president, has a problem, and that is the economic sustainability of the United States. A $36 trillion deficit that's going to go up by a couple of trillion a year is not sustainable. And so it is understood that actions have to be taken by him and by Congress to address that problem. I guess what we debate about is what those actions should be and how they should impact Europe or Canada or Mexico. It's interesting that Mark Carney, in hosting the G7, has invited a big chunk of the world other than the G7 to attend. It's also interesting that both Mark Carney and President Trump are talking both to China and to India. So, you know, folks are reaching out beyond traditional, well-established economic relationships and looking to grow elsewhere. I think we're going to see more of that.
Thank you. You're right. And the negotiations between the U.S. and China have just restarted this morning in London. Another point, and I'll move to you, John, in terms of, I was going to say long-term partners, but I think BFF just cuts it just really well. This morning, Blackstone's CEO said they would invest $500 billion in Europe over the next 10 years just to edge their unpredictability or the unpredictability of the market right now. Obviously, there's a great opportunity. And Brian, if you can allude to some of the opportunities you've seen in your clients, I'd love to see this. But again, to our BFF conversation, John, from your vantage point, your conversation with the administration, where do you see the appetite to rebuild that trust? Obviously, with Quebec, with Canada, the cooperation, the long-standing partnerships. Do you see any of this in the current administration, the current environment?
My observation from the last few days, and there's such a wonderful diversity of opinions and politics in Canada, and I really commend you for that. We don't appreciate that fully. You know, but I hear things like, we're at war, you know, a trade war, and war, and we got to show the Americans who has the leverage, and gee whiz, if what are they going to do if they don't get their aluminum? And on the American side, we're saying, we're at war? I didn't know we're at war. Well, the last thing in the world we're thinking about is some kind of negative relationship with Canada. So it may be, you know, I understand it's acute right now, but I give your prime minister great credit because he's not defining the relationship with a single issue. I think there are some people in Canada, and it's particularly sensitive here, that are defining the relationship, in fact, redefining the relationship with the United States based on trade, particularly aluminum. I can tell you, just so you understand, that everybody in the world wants to do business with the United States right now. Every company wants to do business with the Trump family. You know, 70 deals were cut in the first 21 days with the tariffs. No one should be surprised about tariffs because Donald Trump's been saying it since at least 1986. Okay, that we've been, you know, getting, quote, screwed around the world, okay? And so it shouldn't be a surprise. I think you've got a great leader. In America, we're not aware of this negative situation in the sense of, you know, how do we define the relationship? Now we need to think about other partners that we need to do business with. I think there's a big risk there because one of the things that is a true national security issue, which is much bigger than our deficit and all these things, is that a lot of our critical supply chain is sourced from outside of the United States. We learned that all too well during COVID. And so specifically with aluminum, I would say, I would push, but not push too hard, because maybe the Americans will make the decision that we need to do the aluminum in the United States. The response to that would be, it's going to cost you a lot more money. It's not going to be environmentally friendly. And my retort to that would be, we'll do whatever is necessary in all circumstances. But I believe there's a deal to be done with Canada. I'm not quite convinced that there's a multilateral deal with Mexico, Canada, the United States. Everybody wants that. It's so simple. You just sort of turn the page. But I think that, there's a tremendous amount of animosity with Mexico with respect to the 16 million people that cross my border, with respect to the fentanyl that's been pouring in across our border. And so these are some of the things that keep us up at night, because we still believe we have a wonderful relationship with our neighbor. That's just the honest.
Can I just jump in? And John, I'm really intrigued with some of your comments, and I specifically, and I'm encouraged. So you distinguish, and there's no question you are very close to the administration and to the Trump family, but you distinguish between the flow of both people and drugs from Mexico into the United States versus Canada.
They're both a major problem. And, the major problem with Canada is Vancouver. And I could talk about that and fentanyl all night, but I won't.
You would equate the flow out of Mexico and the flow out of Canada as being a similar type issue?
No.
Okay.
It's a matter of scale, but now we're having on average 2 people cross our southern border. What happened? We got a different president. There is a fentanyl issue. I don't think it's being talked about enough. It is, when you talk about Donald Trump, okay, let's just get real. The border, right? Common sense, drugs, partnerships, real partnerships. The beautiful thing about Donald Trump is he's transactional. So even if somebody dumped on him for the last 8 years, he's willing to cut a deal. He loves to have wins. He'd love to have a win for Canada. He'd obviously love to have a win for the United States. We believe he's brought stability to the Western Hemisphere. And so, Donald Trump, and all the things I'm saying, I say 1,000 times more about our own country. That's how I started. Our house is not in order. That's why we have America first. Not to the exclusion of others, but that we have let our own value system, our economy, our system of justice, our borders really deteriorate. So anything that comes across as criticism, I would give 1,000 times more to our own country, to our former leadership. And so, the good thing is that we're open for business. We want to do deals. We would like to be respected more, quite honestly. I think that, the famous pictures of the G7 and Trump at the desk and Angela Merkel lurking over him and, all of this kind of stuff. So it's not for everybody, but we're rebuilding our military. We're going to rebuild our economy. We're going to onshore a lot of our production. And it's not just things like aluminum. It's small modular nuclear reactors. It's oil and gas. It's being energy independent from the Middle East and other parts of the world. And so every single day walking through D.C., it's UAE wants to do aluminum. It's India wants to do aluminum. It's Mexico wants to do aluminum. And so, this is the broader picture of the.
John, I'm going to stop you right there, if that's okay. I just want to give some time to Bernard. And we hear you, I think, on aluminum. And the reason why you've heard so much of aluminum stuff is because Quebec is by far the largest producer in North America. Some American companies are here. Alcoa is one of them on our territory from New York and Pennsylvania. So that's probably why you heard so much of this stuff here. And again, as I mentioned, this is, for us, it's an energy play. We export aluminum because the reason it's made here is because of hydroelectricity. It's abundant, it's cheap, and I think we hear that the U.S. there's desire to build more smelters, but in the short term, that seems like a challenge. And I'm glad to your point, Brian, that the differentiation between the border management from Mexico to Canada. I think this is something that was thrown in early days as being the same thing, and I'm glad to hear that from.
Well, and that's what's so different from 2017. Is we have two wars that Trump didn't start. We threw 16 million people in our border. And so it's a big mess. We have a big mess, not a Canadian problem, an American problem.
Got it. Thank you. Ben, I'm going to jump back to Europe for a second, and I see our time is flying by. Europe has immense capacity in R&D. We've had long-standing relationship with the EU on that front. Can you talk to some of the key sectors that you would see as pillars of our collaboration between Canada and the EU, either in AI, green technologies, energy, and so on, from your experience between business and politics?
Yes, and what is interesting also is to consider the difference between this debate about tariffs, reset, or war, whatever. When you speak in macroeconomics or microeconomics, Liberation Day was macro. You were mentioning countries, and there was a list of countries, there is a list of things. If we go to an analysis based on the different sectors, it's very different, and it becomes very technical too. So it's a big debate, and even the difference between having a tariff a decision on a country or on a sector is a legal problem. I will not go into this. I'm sure John knows that by heart, but there is a lot of debates about what is the capacity of the President of the United States to determine something in terms of tariff for a country or for a sector. So we are not, it's a very technical issue. Between Europe and Canada, but I would say also between Europe and the US. I mean, we have in Europe our best fields, and we have our weaknesses as always. So, for instance, if you look at the automotive industry, it's a very interesting debate. Very important for Europe, very important for certain countries in Europe, especially Germany, France, Italy. And when in 2018 there was a threat on the automotive, that was a very red signal. And now we have debates on this, and we have seen, for instance, that the subject is more sophisticated than that, because, for instance, a lot of cars are produced by European companies in the US. And the question that was proposed by the German industry was to know how the cars produced in the US should be integrated or not in the accounting of the tariff. So, and we are talking about something simple. It's one sector. So of course we can and we have to cooperate in all the new technology. Canada is very strong in IAA. We are trying in Europe to push for that. We know that we are not as good as the US and eventually Canada in all the innovations because of a lack of investment. And that is one of the ironic change of the situation. Until the beginning of this year, when you were discussing with investors in Europe, they said, well, all the money, all the savings made by the European finish in the US to purchase European companies at the end because of the pension funds and because the revenue is better. And now there is a change. You mentioned the reaction of the US bankers. So there is uncertainty. And as we know, the investors hate uncertainty because it doesn't go well with long term. And we know that some people will decide to not decide anything, which is a choice. Some people will decide to take the risk. And they will make good deals and they will make bad deals because faced with uncertainty, you have no certainty to answer. So I think that what was included into the CETA was already the description of all the fields in which we can do better. So let's go on this. And obviously, we can cooperate together on all the fields of new technologies, all the new transportation, also there is a big issue about pharmacy, which is one very key sector. And this is, I don't know, maybe John can talk about that, because this is in the gray area of what could be attacked or not. According, the president at the beginning has put this out of the debate, but...
What is it?
Pharmacy.
Pharmaceutical.
Drugs, and not the drugs you were mentioning before.
Not the fentanyl part of the conversation.
So, I mean, another thing is that when we are talking about Europe, we are not talking about Canada. What I mean is not only the fact that we have not a physical frontier with the US, and that we are not so much integrated in terms of the process of, that is clearly a difference, but also Europe is an addition of countries, and we are not always aligned. We are aligned in a sense of we have to deal with the situation, but again, Canada knows exactly what he has to do, what he has, the hierarchy of the priorities, etc. In Europe, this is a debate that we have to have together. In a sense, what happened in 2018 was a good repetition, a good lesson. We, at that time, had not the tools to face such a situation that we have now, and we know that there is a discussion like the one between Juncker, the president of the Commission, 7 years ago, with President Trump. Now there is von der Leyen, who is supposed to have this discussion, and we know that we have a deadline, or first deadline maybe, for the 9th of July. And so it's a very, very dense debate. And the question is to find a good balance where there will be not maybe, I'm not sure that it is a win-win situation, but we have to do the best we can to protect what you just, John, said, which is also the Western world capacity of working together.
Merci, Bernard. Our time really flew by, and I know, Brian, you want to add something perhaps on this point. I'll just pause you there for 1 second, and I'll throw a combination of 2 last questions. You pick the one you like, and you have less than a minute to answer each. So that's the target. Looking at your own crystal balls, can you predict a couple things that could or could not happen at the G7 in Kananaskis next week? And maybe one for you, John. Midterm elections, this is something we talk actively in the US. So I'll let you pick your question and your answers, but in less than a minute. Brian, I'll start with you. You seem to have something to add.
I just wanted to offer a vote of thanks to the Trump administration and to Donald Trump for creating the most united country that I've experienced in my adult life. This is a great gift, and I want to thank him for it. Secondly, I want to say...
Talking about the U.S., right?
Secondly, I want to say that the One Canada Act, which will reduce the time it takes by regulation to get a project approved, a major project approved in Canada, from 5 years down to 2 years, is an absolutely epic step that'll unleash capital, unleash talent, and unleash wealth in Canada, and that's a powerful step in the right direction.
Any additional thoughts on G7 or midterms, or you want to skip that one?
No, I decided to ignore your question. And
perfect. You did well, very well. That's a true politician right there. Thank you for this,
I think there's huge opportunities at the G7. You know, I think Canada has some great leadership. You know, the style points matter. Don't let the relationship be defined by an issue. It's okay if you think that America's brought stability to the Western Hemisphere for the last 120 years to say thank you. We appreciate that. We appreciate that you're spending $1 trillion a year on your defense. The midterms are irrelevant to trade. They matter because of subpoena power in the United States House of Representatives. But, you know, I think there'll be a lot of campaigning. There's, 80 million people that voted. for Donald Trump. He had all cards stacked against him. You know, they were trying to kill him. They were trying to ruin him. They were trying to destroy him. They libeled him and slandered him and canceled him and probably a lot of other more horrible things. But at the end of the day, he kicked some butt. So
Thank you. And Bernard, I'll turn over to you for the last closing
well,
words.
First of all, it would be presumptuous to have any idea about the midterms. If it's like if you ask me who would be the next president of France, I have no idea. But I think there is we can go further than the G7, which is an area in which I'm sure there will be a cooperation between our countries. It's a World Cup, because you are going to have the World Cup within the US and Canada, and I think Europe will win.
vodka?
World Cup of soccer.
World Cup, not vodka, World Cup. Well, that's a perfect ending to this very conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you would join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Merci beaucoup à vous tous. Bonne conférence.